Hello and welcome to today's Office Hours presentation. This is your host, Paul Hoyt. Our Office Hours presentations are a relaxed, informal mentoring program that we do almost every Monday at noon Pacific time. All these recordings, slides, and exercises are archived in our members area, and all these recordings are also available on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/user/Paul Hoyt. The reasons we do this is because being a successful small business owner can be a great experience, but I also know that it's tough. You need education, training, tools, and team in order to be successful. And we want you to get to know us, because when you get to know us, you'll know that first and most importantly that we want you, that we do care about you. And we want you to succeed in every area of your life, whatever that means to you. We want you to find the greatness, the happiness, the divinity that you have within yourselves, and remember it, embrace it, and live it every single day as we try to do. Our passion is to increase the survival rate, accelerate the growth rate, and reduce the struggle rate of businesses in America. And our vision, is to help millions of CEOs and entrepreneurs accelerate their business growth and enjoy greater harmony and balance in their lives. And if you find these office hours presentations helpful to you, please pass the word. We want to help as many CEOs and entrepreneurs as we can, and that means having our friends who see the value in these share them on their social media pages, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and with their community so that we can support their friends who are also CEOs and entrepreneurs in the same way that we're able to help you. Our office hours agenda is usually an in-depth discussion of a business success principle. Then we offer some closing remarks, some special offers, and an invitation for the next week's session. And then we go into open Q&A and coaching. So as we go through the presentation today, be thinking about your questions and things that you'd like to discuss in a little bit more depth. And you'll have the opportunity to share and even take you off of mute and let you share live with the folks who are on the call. If you have a question that you'd like for it to remain anonymous, and every once in a while people ask a question that is best not attributed to them, be sure to note that in the window when you type in your question, and we won't mention your name whenever we read the question and then respond to it. We invite you to join us in the Awakened CEO communities on both LinkedIn and Facebook, where we publish a business success principle of the day 4 times a week on both Facebook and LinkedIn, and the energy of the day posting that we do every day on Facebook. Every morning when I get up, I try to write something a little meaningful and inspirational and encouraging, and put that into an energy of the day message and post that on Facebook as kind of my give back to the world and part of my own spiritual discipline and part of my own personal practice as well. During the call, we invite you to join us in our Facebook Awakened CEO community, where you can make comments and ask questions and share insights and takeaways. And our goal is always to have 20 comments and likes in our Facebook group. In addition to the office hours presentations, we do an Awakened conversation periodically. I think we're going to do these about once a month. It's an interactive webinar with special guests, and our next one is scheduled for October 21st at 6 p.m. Pacific time. We were going to do one this week, but unfortunately at the last minute our guests fell through, and instead of rescheduling, we just decided to pass, and we'll do one in October. The Awakened Conversations are focused primarily on personal growth and on emotional intelligence, where the office hours presentations are focused primarily on tips and techniques to help you build a more profitable, sustainable, and scalable business. So watch your emails for sign-up information on our next Awakened Conversation. Today's topic is on emotional intelligence, the secret of effective leadership. As always, I try to relate the subject matter of the day to one or more of our key performance areas, and this one's all about leadership. It's about your opportunity and, yes, your responsibility to be a more effective leader through understanding emotional intelligence and through increasing and improving your own emotional intelligence and the emotional intelligence of the people that work with you and for you. We also relate the subject matter of the day to one of the 3 levels of performance that we talk about in the Awakened CEO system: mindset, methods, or momentum. And emotional intelligence is all about mindset. We are going to offer some methods for you to increase your own emotional intelligence, but primarily emotional intelligence is about getting your head screwed on straight. It's about having the best vibration that you can, the best perspective and the best attitude that you can, as you'll see when we get into it. And the agenda today, we're going to talk about what is emotional intelligence in the first place. We'll talk about several different models of emotional intelligence. We'll talk about emotional intelligence in job performance, emotional intelligence in the brain, which is a real exciting topic to me, ways that you can improve your emotional intelligence, how emotional intelligence relates to personal growth, and then we'll sum it all up to the bottom line. First, what is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence was a term coined at Yale in 1990. That's 25 years ago. I found it outstanding when I began to research this subject that there was so much science around the term emotional intelligence and that it had been around for such a long time, because when I worked in corporate America, nobody talked about emotional intelligence. And when over the last 14 years, as I've been a business consultant, I have not heard any other speech or other business consultant talk about emotional intelligence and the entrepreneur. And my focus has been on the entrepreneur. So I was real excited to find this incredible body of knowledge that had been accumulated at Yale University and other universities over the last 25 years on the subject of emotional intelligence. The definition that I'd like to offer for you for emotional intelligence is this: that emotional intelligence, or what they call EQ, is the ability to identify, use, understand, and manage emotions in positive ways to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. And that definition came from helpguide.org. If you have high emotional intelligence, you are able to recognize your own emotional state and the emotional states of others and engage with people in a way that draws them to you. I want to repeat that. You can engage with people in a way that draws them to you. You can use this understanding of emotions to relate better to other people, form healthier relationships, achieve greater success at work, and lead a more fulfilling life. To me, that makes emotional intelligence something very desirable and very, very appealing. As it turns out, there are three different modes of couple of different modes of intelligence that I want to cover. Mostly when we think about intelligence, we think about cognitive intelligence and we think about IQ. So cognitive intelligence relates to a person's ability to learn, understand, and apply information in a meaningful way. And emotional intelligence relates to how a person recognizes emotions in himself or herself and in others and manages these emotional states to work better with others, and I would say to be more productive, more effective, more efficient, and to get the job done in a lot better ways too. So those are the two different types of intelligences. And frankly, there's some discussion out there in academic communities about whether emotional intelligence is a real intelligence or whether it's a skill because they like the term intelligence to refer to cognitive intelligence. One assumption was made for a long time when it came to cognitive intelligence was that intelligence could not be improved, that you either had it or you didn't have it when you were born, and the intelligent quotient was a measure of how your intelligence age corresponded to your chronological age. In fact, that was the definition of IQ. It was your age of intelligence divided by your physical age or your biological age. There is no, as far as I can tell, correlation to EQ of emotional quotient as being your emotional age divided by your real or chronological age, but there certainly is the concept of higher and lower emotional intelligence. Now, as we come to find out these days that there are ways to increase your cognitive intelligence, and it has to do through practice and repetition and through game playing and through focus on activities that help you be able to understand and process information more that actually can increase your cognitive intelligence. And there are ways, of course, that you can increase your emotional intelligence, and we'll be talking about those a little bit later on in our presentation. There are three different models of emotional intelligence: the ability model, the trait model, and the mixed model. And I want to talk about each one of those for just a minute here. The ability model says essentially that somebody with high emotional intelligence will have abilities. Those abilities will include the ability to perceive emotions in themselves and others, the ability to use emotional states to be able to do what it is that they want to accomplish, to understand emotions, where my emotions came from and where your emotions might come from, and then the ability to manage emotions. And this ability model comes from Salovey and Meyer, who are two of I think these are the two folks who actually defined the term emotional intelligence at Yale University 25 years ago. And they put forth the ability model of emotional intelligence. But there's also a trait model of emotional intelligence. And these are traits which we say that somebody with high emotional intelligence would have specific traits in addition to having abilities. They would have the trait of having well-being. They'd be healthy and strong people. They'd be warm and sociable people, people who felt comfortable with working with other people and perhaps even in crowds of other people. They would exhibit great self-control. In other words, they would never lose it, and curse out a colleague or a boss or, or somebody else. And they would be focused and determined. So people who have high emotional intelligence typically exhibit these traits. They're healthy and strong, they're warm and sociable, they have great self-control, and they're focused and determined people in general. The mixed model of emotional intelligence talks about several different aspects. It talks about self-awareness, self-regulation, social skills, empathy or compassion for others, and motivation. And this was put forth by Daniel Goleman, who wrote one of the most famous books on emotional intelligence, written several years ago, I think 2001 or 2002, that I have read and used as a little bit of source material for today's presentation. In this mixed model, he really likes this quadrant model for emotional intelligence. And so we find ourselves with two different dimensions, the internal-external dimension, or personal and social competence, and the dimension of awareness and management, or what he calls the dimension of regulation and recognition. So there are these four different quadrants of ways to think about competence and excellence in the way of emotional intelligence. Here's a little more detail on those. Internally, if we have great self-awareness, we have great self-competence, the awareness of our own emotional state, recognizing how our behavior impacts others, and the ability to pay attention to how others are triggering and influencing our emotional state. For self-management, then, we get along well with others. We don't lose control. We handle conflict appropriately and effectively. We're able to clearly express our ideas and emotions. And we are sensitive to another person's feelings and can manage those interactions successfully. When it comes to recognition outside of ourselves, that falls into the category of social awareness, where we're able to pick up the mood in a room and we care about what's going on with others and we hear what that person is really saying. And when it comes to regulation, or being able to manage and control ourselves externally, people with high emotional intelligence get along well with others. They handle conflict effectively. They're able to clearly express themselves in a way that they're understood by other people, and they can use this sensitivity to another person's feelings to manage those interactions successfully. So relationship management has a lot to do with self-management. Generally speaking, if we're not able to manage our own emotions, to recognize our own emotions and to regulate and manage our own emotions, we find it very difficult to recognize and be aware of the emotions in other people and to be able to manage situations where emotional conflict might arise or there's an opportunity for greater emotional bonding. So I like this is a really good map and a way to understand how the scientists and the psychologists are defining and using the term emotional intelligence. We use it in terms of awareness and management, and we use it in terms of internally and externally. And there are lots of different tools that we can use to help with our awareness and help with our management of other people, of ourselves and other people. I'm going to talk about just a couple of those tools right now. I'm going to talk about the mood meter and the ruler skills. Both of these are courtesy of Mark Brackett at Yale University, who is right now one of the leading experts in the area of emotional intelligence. And they are developing these tools for use with elementary school and junior high school children. So they can also be used, as parents. You can use these with your kids, and you can use these, somehow I think in a business environment as well. What they find is that when they teach children what these tools are all about, they give people a common language and a way to discuss emotions and to relate to each other about the emotional states that they are experiencing. So the first one I talk about is the mood meter. The mood meter is pretty simple. It's another one of these quadrants. And in this particular case, the two dimensions of this quadrant are your energy level and whether or not you're in a positive state, or the pleasantness level. They like people to evaluate themselves and say, which one of these four quadrants are you in? Are you in the lower left quadrant, where you have low energy and low pleasantness, where you might be sad or bored or melancholy or tired? Or are you find yourself in the upper left quadrant, which is the high energy and low pleasantness or low positivity quadrant, where you might find yourself to be afraid, angry, annoyed, agitated, or anxious? Or do you find yourself to be in the lower right-hand quadrant, which is where you are relaxed but very pleasant? So you might find yourself to be relaxed or contented or serene or peaceful. Or do you find yourself to be in the upper right-hand quadrant, where you are happy, joyful, and excited and ecstatic, even rapturous in that upper right-hand quadrant? What they find is when they teach children about the mood meter, that they can more easily have great conversations. They have greater self-awareness, and they have greater awareness of the emotional states of other people, because they're able to have conversations because they have a common language. People can say that I'm in the upper right, or I'm in the lower left, or I'm not feeling very good right now and I don't have very high energy, or I'm feeling great but I don't have very high energy. And they can begin to reflect better on their own emotional states. So they ask themselves these awareness questions. Where are you on the mood meter? What caused you to feel this way? What word best describes your current feeling right now? And then how are you expressing this feeling to other people? And given what you feel, what strategies will you use right now to manage your emotional state, to change your emotional state in some way? They also teach children the ruler skills. And there are 5 of these that correspond to the word ruler. R stands for recognizing the emotions in yourself and others. U stands for understanding the causes and the consequences of your emotional state. L stands for labeling your emotions accurately. E stands for expressing your emotions appropriately. And R stands for regulating your emotions effectively. So what they find is that when they teach children the mood meter, and when they teach children about these ruler skills, they can have great conversations with them that really improve the classroom environment, that allow people to gain in emotional control and emotional maturity, and gain in their own emotional intelligence, which leads to greater learning, leads to greater productivity and effectiveness too. So you might ask yourself questions, by the way, about how are you at recognizing emotions in yourself and others, and how are you at understanding the causes and consequences of your emotional states, and can you label them and express them and regulate your own emotional states well? Because I think that these same lessons are good not only for the kids, but also good for those of us who are still wanting to be a better person over time. As it turns out, there are a lot of variations in emotional experience out there, and there's 3 dimensions about how people vary in their emotional experiences: how quickly emotions are felt, how deeply emotions are felt, and how enduring are the emotional states. I know that in my particular case, I think that I have been in my lifetime a fairly sensitive person. I've always wanted to be a Labrador retriever. A Labrador is the most loved breed of animal or dog in the United States, at least, if not the entire world, because they're very gregarious. You know, they're very easy to get along with, and everybody loves a Labrador. Unfortunately, earlier in my life, I was a ranting, raving Chihuahua, you know, yipping and yapping all the time, you know, and anxious and frightened. And the reason is because that's the way that I learned to protect myself. You know, in school, I was a small guy and unfortunately a pretty lippy guy. And so the way that I protected myself was by being antagonistic and sarcastic and critical. And, you know, I was verbally aggressive, not physically aggressive, but verbally aggressive, because that's the only way I knew to protect myself. I'm happy to say that over the years I've become a Cocker Spaniel. I'm a much easier person to get along with these days than I ever have been in my life. And I still aspire to be a Labrador. Who knows, maybe someday I will make that. But what I know is that high emotional intelligence and life experience can really pay off. And I'm going to go back a little bit to the trait model here, because people who have high emotional intelligence have, I think, a greater life experience, a more comfortable life experience. And generally speaking, they're healthy and strong, they're warm and sociable, they have greater self-control, they're focused and determined, they're able to accomplish more. And that means that there's a strong correlation in between emotional intelligence and job performance most of the time. Most of the time, we see a very positive correlation that we find between emotional intelligence and job performance, but not in all of the studies that we have done. What we found is that emotional intelligence becomes more important as the importance of cognitive intelligence decreases. And if a job doesn't require emotional labor, then frankly, emotional intelligence isn't that important to us. In fact, there can be a negative correlation in between job performance and emotional intelligence when the job requires a tremendous amount of focus and attention and solo efforts. So people who really who are very emotional people, very gregarious people, and very focused on relationships may not do well if the job does not require that skill set, but rather requires a completely different skill set. And a couple of slides will tell you why. The more highly specialized and independent the job, the less emotionally intelligent manners, but the more the job requires leading others and teamwork and getting along with others, the more emotional intelligence does matter. And there are some jobs out there that require a tremendously high quotient of emotional intelligence. Customer service, caregivers, sales-related jobs, and leaders in general. Those people who care for other people, those people who are responsible in some way with the relationship in between their company and other people, those people who are salespeople. One of the cornerstones of sales is establishing trust and rapport, and it's your high degree of emotional intelligence that will allow you to do that. And of course, leaders need a lot of high emotional intelligence in their jobs. And I think the highest leaders that we have in our society generally have very high emotional intelligence. In fact, our current president, Barack Obama, you know, it doesn't matter whether you like the politics and whether you consider yourself to be a Democrat or Republican, and whether you consider him to be a very fine leader or not. I think in general, we can all agree that he has very, very high emotional intelligence. We see him generally smiling. I don't see him being angry and vehement with other people. We generally know that he tries to get along with other people. In general, other presidents have too. John F. Kennedy, early in my childhood, was a person of great high emotional intelligence. Ronald Reagan had great emotional intelligence. Bill Clinton had great emotional intelligence. George Bush, the first and the second, not so much. Jimmy Carter had great emotional intelligence. What we see is that politicians in general have high emotional intelligence, but not always. But I think generally speaking, the leaders that we have elected over time have very high emotional intelligence. I want to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence and the brain. because this is one of the most interesting parts about doing the research that I've done on emotional intelligence. And that is that there is this little part of your brain called the amygdala, which has a strange little shape and is right in the middle of your brain that controls your emotional responses. And it is there in the amygdala that we notice whenever somebody has an emotional response that that particular part of the brain gets activated. There are two other parts of the brain, which are the basal ganglia, which is down at the lower part of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex, which is at the top of the brain, that control the habits and the cognitive abilities respectively. And here's why that's important, is because that the basal ganglia, which is where the habits are in the brain, evolved the first and is by far the most powerful part of our brain. The amygdala, which is where emotions are controlled out of, evolved next, and it is a very powerful part of the brain and the next most powerful part of the brain. And the prefrontal cortex, which is where all of our cognitive abilities happen, evolved the last, and frankly, it's the least most powerful part of our brain. So for years and years, I identified myself, my sense of personal identity came from my thoughts. I always thought that I am the thinker inside my head, as opposed to I am the emotional person inside my head, or I am the habits that I've built over time. But the truth is that our habits are more powerful than our emotions, and our emotions are more powerful than our thoughts. Think about that for a second. That's why somebody who's in a high emotional state may still have problems changing their habits and their addictions, is because the habits are more powerful than our emotional states. And what we find is that if we're in a state of emotional distress, that it essentially has hijacked our ability to think. There's been lots of studies out there that has shown that when we are either in emotional mode and creative mode, or we're in rational and doing mode, that those two are kind of mutually exclusive. It's hard to be very, very emotional and very rational at the same time. We hear people talk about left brain and right brain. It's a little more complex than that, but the common knowledge about left brain and right brain people and emotional versus rational people is true whenever we do MRI resonant imaging and we find out, what's really going on inside the brain. It's really quite fascinating. The people who are creative and emotional may find it difficult switching contexts and becoming rational and analytical over time, that it really does take different areas of the brain, and it's almost impossible. It certainly is challenging for both of those areas of the brain to be active at the same time. So again, here, very high, strong habits override almost everything in your life. That strong emotions will override your logic, and we only think effectively when our habits and our emotions are in check, or when thinking is perceived to be the only way to escape a dangerous situation. So what does this mean to you as a CEO? What does this mean to you as an entrepreneur? Well, the CEO of a company has to be involved with customer service. The CEO of the company is also a caregiver for people on their team and for the relationships that they have with industry analysts and their partners. The CEO of the team has to be the lead salesperson for their company. It is not possible for you to fully delegate everything that has to do with sales. You have to be a salesperson when you are the CEO of your company. And of course, the CEO is the leader of the company. In other words, in every aspect of the job of being a CEO, unless you are just a solopreneur that doesn't have to sell a lot, that has like one or two clients that value your technical skills and your abilities so much that they don't care whether or not you're a nice person to deal with, you really have to focus on emotional intelligence. And this, of course, is what the Awakened CEO system is all about. When we talk about the importance of focusing on business growth, professional growth, and personal growth at the same time, it's this level of emotional intelligence that we're talking about improving on over time so that you can be a more effective CEO. The good news is that there are a lot of ways to improve your emotional intelligence. You can ask others how they feel to practice your abilities to accurately assess the emotional states of other people. And by the way, it takes honest people to respond to you, people who just aren't responding with, I'm feeling great, or I'm feeling fine, but will honestly check in and say, I'm not doing so well right now. Or on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm about a 7.5. I'm a little troubled about this. I'm feeling a little bit anxious about that. I'm a little worried about that. Get people who will honestly respond to you will help you develop your ability to accurately assess the emotional state of other people. You can also study personality and mindset differences, and there are lots of them out there. The Myers-Briggs test, the DISC test, the Enneagrams test, the thinking styles test. Usually, when consultants come in from the outside and focus on organizational development, one of the very first things that they do is give one of these profiling exercises to the people in the room, because they want them to increase their understanding of the different capabilities of people and have a greater emotional awareness and awareness of the differences in between people. You can also study and practice dialogue and conflict resolution methodologies to improve the area of emotional intelligence that involves working with other people and managing your relationships. To improve your EI, you can practice self-assessments. You can practice self-control, which you may just decide to practice breathing before you're responding or counting to 10 before you're responding. I remember Dad telling me every once in a while, Paul, count to 10. Before you say that next word, make sure that you take a little time out and get your emotions in check here. You can also walk away. I've had people that I've worked with before that was their primary technique for managing their own emotional states, was that if they find themselves starting to blow up, that they would leave the meeting. When they found themselves starting to get grimace, grit, or clench their teeth and clench their fists and start to say something that they didn't want to say, the best thing that they could do is actually leave the meeting. So sometimes walking away can be a very effective way of managing your emotional states. And I encourage people to practice changing your mood and your perspective. When you check in with yourself using the mood meter or some other device, when you find yourself to be in control, then you can start to focus on improving your perspective and improving your mood and changing your attitude. And there are other ways to improve your emotional intelligence. One of the ways is to hang around people who have high emotional intelligence and to limit your time around people who have low emotional intelligence. When we talk about personal growth, we talk about the contagiousness of an emotional state, that we want to bring love and light to the world, that we want to have as high a positive vibration as we can because of the impact that we have on the people we work with. As it turns out, there are things called mirror neurons in your brain, and brain studies have shown that we automatically pick up on the vibrational state, the emotional state of other people, and we do this subconsciously in a habitual kind of way, to where it's really never even known to us in our cognitive mind, in our conscious mind, that our brains really do interpret the information that we're seeing and the information that we're hearing, and it does trigger responsive and resonant emotional states in ourselves. So if you want to improve your own emotional intelligence and improve your own emotional states, hang around people who have high emotional intelligence, and it will in fact rub off on you. And if you limit your time around people who have low emotional intelligence, you will find that their bad moods, bad attitudes, bad habits, bad emotional states are not rubbing off on you as well. And what they have found as the number one technique for improving your own emotional intelligence is, surprise, meditation. When you can consistently give yourself the ability to relax and let go of stress, when you can teach yourself at the habitual level that you can relieve your stress, that you can let go of this anxiousness and tension that you have in your life, that you don't have to be thinking all the time, that you can return to a state of relaxation, a state of serenity and tranquility and calmness and stillness and peacefulness and bliss, that it can really impact your ability to control your own emotional states and your ability to control and help others manage their emotional states too. For me, emotional intelligence is a key part of personal growth. It's an essential and very large part, but for me, personal and spiritual growth is even more than that. To me, personal and spiritual growth goes way beyond just competence and effectiveness, which is what all of the language and the work that's done that I've read so far has to do. It really talks about competence and effectiveness and relaxation. To me, personal growth and spiritual growth goes well beyond that. It goes into, as I said earlier, spreading love and light wherever we can, about really feeling one with our fellow humans and feeling connected to everybody that's out there. So to me, I use the terms personal and spiritual growth as being a little bit higher on the evolutionary scale than I do emotional intelligence. So here's the bottom line. You can focus on your emotional intelligence. You can find ways to improve your emotional intelligence. You can encourage those around you to do the same thing. And you can get coaches and trainers and consultants and therapists and counselors to help you do that, especially if you have an issue with self-control, especially if you have an issue with that sometimes you find yourself getting into anxious states and angry states so that you have a tendency to self-destruct in your relationships and especially your job relationships, then it can be a very good idea to work with coaches and therapists and counselors to give yourselves some very basic techniques for self-control, and of course to help you learn meditation and other things that you can do to lower your overall baseline anxiety and to generally improve your self-control, your ability to assess and understand and manage your own emotional states, and to assess, manage, and understand the emotional states in others. That's been our agenda for today. We talked about what is emotional intelligence, models of emotional intelligence in job performance, emotional intelligence in the brain, improving your emotional intelligence, a little reflection that I offered on emotional intelligence and personal growth, and summed it all up for the bottom line. So here's your homework. Take time to reflect on your own emotional intelligence and that of others in your life. Think about the value of increasing your own emotional intelligence, and then work diligently every day to learn and grow and become the best person that you can possibly be. We're going to open it up to questions and answers and coaching here in just a minute. First, comments and questions on the topic of the day, and then on any other issues that you might want to discuss. Then I invite you to tell me what your biggest takeaways are and insights that you gained from this presentation, and tell me what you're going to focus on. Here at the Hoyt Management Group, we have 3 different levels of support services. We can teach you how to do things for yourselves with our education and training programs, or we can do it with you. We also, in some cases, will do it for you. So there are different ways that we can support you across all of the different key performance areas of your business, and we'd love to have a conversation with you about how we can help you define your goals and then achieve those goals in your business. As a quick reminder, we also do an Awakened CEO conversation. Our next one will be on October 21st, a couple of weeks away, 3 weeks down the road for us. So watch your emails for your next sign-up information. And next Monday, we invite you to join us again for an office hours presentation. The topic is to be determined. We're not decided what we're going to talk about next week. You could let me know what topics that you would like for me to address or us to address on our next office hours presentation at paulssurvey.com, and do your homework and in between now and then. So let's open it up to questions and answers and coaching and discussion. Now, Stephanie, do we have any questions and topics to talk about today? If you are talking, I cannot hear you. Oops. I can see that Stephanie just texted me and said her internet has gone out, so she can't ask the questions. But let me see if I can look into the question log here and see if we had some questions come forth here. So I will look a little bit, and yeah, we do have a couple of questions that we have come forth. Here's the first question. In thinking about the mood meter, are there other ways of checking in and doing a quick self-assessment? Yeah, and there really are. I was delighted to see the mood meter, and it's the way that it offers, especially to children, the way to check in with themselves and offer, some really see where their emotional state is, how positive they are, and how energized they are. I've often used a four-part assessment in the past. The four-part assessment that I have used as checking in with myself that says, how am I doing physically? How am I doing emotionally? How am I doing mentally? In other words, are my thoughts out of control, or are my thoughts productive or not? And then how am I doing spiritually? What is my level of detachment and awareness and consciousness? So that's what I generally use, is a four-part assessment, not just a single part assessment. So the mood meter functions primarily on emotions because it was designed around emotional intelligence. But to me, I find it more useful to think about all four dimensions of my life. How am I doing physically? How am I doing emotionally? How am I doing mentally? And how am I doing spiritually? Because I find that those four really relate to each other. I find that if I'm in a state of physical stress, in other words, very, very hungry or very, very thirsty or very, very tired, that it impacts my emotional state, and it impacts my ability to think clearly, and it impacts my level of awareness and detachment as well. So that I find that if I'm in a comfortable physical state, then generally I'm in a better mood. Generally my thoughts are clear and crisp and sharp, and generally I'm in a higher spiritual state. It's easier for me to let go and to detach and step into a higher level of awareness whenever I'm in a good physical state. So for me, those four areas are all very related, and that's why I do a four-part assessment periodically throughout the day instead of just the one-part assessment focusing on emotional growth. Let me see if we have other questions here as well. I'm going to open up my question log. We do have questions, but hang on just a second because I'm having a hard time opening up my question log. There it is. I had to find it because I'm not quite this versed on this. Let me see here. All right, now I got it. Okay. Here's some good questions, and thank you very much for those people who are on the call and who have offered questions and comments. Dr. Giovanni Romana says it's a great topic, and I really do appreciate too. Here's a question from Michael Charters that says, when is your next book coming out and on the topic of daily thoughts and meditations? I published a couple of collections of what I call insights. What I find is that I get insights periodically. I'm blessed with poems and songs and just insightful messages that mean a lot to me. And they mean a lot to me because being in a higher state of consciousness and being a happier, kinder, wiser, more peaceful, powerful person means a lot to me. I really want to be at my best, and I want to see you be at your best too. So whenever I have a little insight, I write it down. I get it and I write it down because I don't want to forget it. I want to be able to go back the next day or the next week or the next month and go back and reflect on that insight, because I know that it can help me elevate my mood and my consciousness and help me experience life in the way that I want to experience life. So in 2000, well, the first one that I came about was my CD I call Remember, which I published in 2005, where I got this wonderful message that was about 45 minutes long that I wrote down and practiced and recorded and published in that CD. And since then, I started giving a lot more. I published The Practice of Awakening in 2010 and The Practice of Awakening 2, The First Light of Joy in 2013. And I think the next one is 2016. I counted up the other day, and I think it was about somewhere between 80 and 100 messages or insights that I have written down that were really powerful and helpful to me since I published the last book. So, by the way, not every insight that I have survives the editor's cut. So I have to get up around 150 or 200 of them even, so that I can cull out the ones that on reflection months down the road don't seem to have the value of the other ones. So I think sometime in 2016 will be my next book. I did write a book in between 2013 and 2016, but instead of publishing it as a book, I put it on the internet. It's called thelevelsofcreation.com, which basically takes all of the wisdom that I think I've ever gained over my lifetime, and I put it online. It's free for everybody to take a look at. So you can take a look at my really my latest work, The Levels of Creation, on the website. That's free and easy for you to take a look at. So thank you very much for that question. I appreciate that. And one of the attendees on the call is offering a quick takeaway, which is to lower the time around people, those with a low EI. You know, there are, and I really appreciate that, there are people out there who have the gift and the blessing of being able to be around people who are in distressed states and being able to be around them, you know, in a way that it really does not impact their emotional state over time. And I certainly have that ability, unless the person with a low emotional state takes me by surprise. If it takes me by surprise and I haven't prepared myself for that, then I have a tendency to be impacted greatly. But if I'm walking into a situation where I know the person is sad, or I know the person is troubled, or I know the person is experiencing a lot of grief in their life, then you can put yourself in a state of detachment and a state of observance and a state of kindness and compassion that allows you to serve that other person and to be able to communicate a high emotional intelligence and to be able to communicate a compassionate and peaceful experience to that other person that can be really helpful to them. And some people are, I'm sure, are just blessed to be, experiencing and communicating and sharing love and light and compassion and encouragement and support every second of their day, but I'm not blessed to be there quite yet. So I really appreciate that takeaway for limiting your time around people with low emotional intelligence. And I would say, especially if you find yourself to be in a state of lower emotional intelligence, because then their low emotional intelligence can just drag you down into the pit of darkness with them. And we don't want that to happen. So if you check in with yourself and you say, I'm feeling a little blue right now, I'm feeling a little anxious right now, I'm a little pissed off right now, you may find be much to your advantage to put yourself around people who have high emotional intelligence instead of those around low emotional intelligence. And here's a question from Mary. I have been told, she says, that I have a very high EQ, yet you're a good listener, intuitive, etc. But how does this connect to being a highly sensitive person? And the question is more about how monitoring your feelings as you care and support and listen to others, especially in the area of grief support work. And without knowing it, I think I kind of answered that question a little bit too. But there are people out there like me. I know that I'm much higher in sensitivity than many other people. And that means that I get triggered, or used to get triggered, very, very easily, that I got upset easily, that I was quick to cry and quick to get angry and quick to respond and lash out at other people. And I think I was one of those highly sensitive people from an emotional state. By the way, I've been told that the term highly sensitive people also refers to people who are gifted intuitively. And the term sensitivity may not just refer to emotional sensitivity, but may be referring to, intuitive sensitivity as well, as in the sense of having this experience of being guided or being, kind of knowing things, about having some precognition capability even. But that's not the way I use the term sensitivity. I use it strictly in whether or not the three dimensions of being a highly sensitive person to me are you quick to respond? Do you respond very deeply? And how enduring are the emotional responses that you have? If you're very quick to respond and you respond very deeply and it sticks with you for a long time, then to me that you are a very highly sensitive person. And again, I think that connects well with your ability to be a good listener, but also as a sensitive person, you can take on the negative emotional energy from other people So you do have to limit your time, or at least control and manage your own emotional state when you're around people who have those lower emotional states. But the good news is about being a highly sensitive person is that when you're around people who are joyful, and when you're around people who are stepping into their power, and when you're around people who are peaceful, that we find that we're very contagious to those emotional states too. We're typically the first people to laugh at a joke, and we're the people who really, really appreciate the kindness and the compassion and the love and the friendship of other people too. So it's kind of a two-sided sword there, that we are deeply sensitive to the emotional states of others. It's not only the negative states, it's also those wonderful, wonderful positive states too. And I'm looking around to see if we have any other questions. I think I got one or two other questions here. Let me see if I can pull these out. Hang on, here we go. Here's one that the person writes in. I know people who are jerks, but they're real successful in business. They don't seem to need emotional intelligence, and why not? I've been reflecting on this quite a bit, because there are people out there who are known to be jerks that seem to be, have a lot of success in business. The two of them in my world that came about are Larry Ellison. I don't know how Larry's doing now, so I don't mean to accuse him of anything today. But earlier in his career, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, Larry was known as a person who was very difficult to get along with. That he was a my way or the highway kind of person, and he was a very, I would say, not an emotionally intelligent person. Another person is Steve Jobs, who at Apple Computer is notoriously cruel to other people and very difficult to get along with. We also find that sometimes that we're working with people who are so skilled at what they do, and they're so capable of doing valuable things for us and with us, that we overlook their lack of emotional intelligence. So to me, those are the only two conditions that one can get by on having very, very low emotional intelligence, at being cruel, at being a jerk, at being difficult to get along with, is either if you are running the company and own the company, or if you are working in an individual contributor role. But the second that teamwork becomes valuable, the second that you need to be able to manage and get along with other people, the second that you need to be effective in sales and in any of those high EI jobs, customer service, being a caregiver, being a salesperson, or being an effective leader, then emotional intelligence starts to have a very positive correlation with your ability to do a good job and to effectively lead other people. So to me, that's the best kind of off the top of my head answer that I can give. If you're so darn good at what you do that we just can't live without you, then we'll overlook your inability to get along with other people and to be a jerk. But we won't do that forever, by the way. About the minute we find that we can do without you, or we have the opportunity to do without you, or we have the opportunity to sabotage you in some way, then you got to look out. Emotionally unintelligent people don't last long at their jobs, usually because of the sabotage and the work that other people will do to undo their positions at the company. What we find is that if people cannot deal with you directly, that they will deal with you indirectly. If they cannot attack you and defend themselves directly, they will find ways to do away with you, to do you harm via sabotage, via gossip, via spreading rumors, via just saying, yeah, I don't know about that guy. I'm not sure that girl really gets it. They'll find ways to do away with you. On the other hand, if you have very high emotional intelligence, people will find ways to help you do better in your job. They will want to reach out for you, and they will want to support you. They'll want to collaborate with you. They'll want to help you. And ideally, if somebody says, if I was going to another company and I could just bring one person with me, it'd be that person. And it typically is not the person who's the jerk. It's the person who has very high emotional intelligence and is also very competent in their job and they can do a good job. And that's what we want for each and every one of you. We want you to be the person that people want to work with. We want you to be the person that people want to hire. We want you to be the person that people want to collaborate with and cooperate with and bring along to that next job. And they want to acquire your company just so they can work with you because you're such a wonderful person to be around, competent in terms of business, competent in terms of your professional acumen, in terms of your skills and your knowledge, and highly emotional intelligent in your ways, in your way of managing your own emotions, in your sensitivity to other people's emotions, and in your ability to manage great relationships. And with that, I think we're going to call our webinar for today over with. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. We want you to be a person who is loved and respected and admired by other people and embraced by other people, just like we try to be for ourselves. And so until we talk again the next time, this is Paul Hoyt, thanking you again for tuning in and wishing you a most marvelous and prosperous day. Bye-bye.